In this section, we turn from the middle class to the working class, trying to look at how the working classes created and their experiences socially from the developments of the Industrial Revolution. And to try and underscore their changes, I've broken it down into sort of three ideas in terms of how the working life is transformed by the Industrial Revolution. One of the main things I want to draw out is the effect of the factory on working class sense of self and working class life. The factory was a new creation, a new system to try and organize work and labor. And so one of the first elements is work was changed in terms of a manner of control. If you think about previous ways in which workers had worked, they had worked in guilds, they had worked as part of apprentice systems where they were trained by a master and the goal was to develop them and help them to become masters of their own. Instead now in the factory they were simply being managed by, well, managers whose goal was not to help them, whose goal was not to make them better people, but simply to make them more efficient, to manage them and make them work efficiently. So this is a real loss of sense of self and sense of control. Another element of this loss of control is the clock, namely what they felt that they were on. Because of the obsession with efficiency, many workers believed that they were on the clock. They would show up at the factory, punch in on the clock, and the manager would regulate every manner of their life. This is why if some of you work and you have a lunch hour, well, that's an example of this factory mindset. The company wants you to only have that time to yourself because they want to get you back on the clock where they can regulate and ensure that you're working efficiently. Because of all of this, workers really get a sense that they're a cog in a machine. Their perception is, and quite accurately in terms of the perception of the factory owners, is the workers are just easily replaceable. These are not people to be valued. They are cogs to be used up and discarded when needed. If a worker gets injured on the job, well, sucks for them, but they can be discarded and we can find another worker just like them. And so this is the attitude that workers really start to experience, and this is why so many workers start really chafing under the factory system, because they do feel as though they are being dehumanized, that they've lost all sense of control, that the managers are in control. And this is why, for example, when socialism, which we'll talk about later in the course, takes off, people are attracted to the ideas of, say, communism, where Marx says that workers need to seize the means of production meaning factories, because then they can get control back, they can set the clock, and they will no longer be cogs, they will be owners. This is why this really resonates. So their working class life is really informed by a sense of loss of power and loss of agency. Now, just as importantly, the family life was transformed for the working class, and I've broken it down in terms of problems and opportunities. One of this is, in terms of some of the problems, is that the family is in many ways split apart by the factory system. Oftentimes you have men and women and children who had formerly worked together under the same family roof being separated. Men are having to go off to the factories, they're the one in the factory jobs and the like. Now initially there was sort of a linkage of families in the factories, but as the owners wanted to be more efficient, they really started to separate things along gender lines. There were the skilled male workers, and women workers would work in their own factories, and children would do odd jobs as they were desiring. And so this really sort of splits apart and breaks down the family structure of many of the working class. At the same time, it is a time of opportunity. Factories did give opportunities to those who in previous eras might not have had much in the way of opportunity. Women, for example, enjoyed greatly expanded opportunities due to the Industrial Revolution. Machinery meant that you didn't have to rely on physical brute force to do anything, and thus women were able to work in factories that are allied to machinery as much as men. It doesn't take much to pull the same lever. Some women then would work in factories. Some found work as domestic help or teachers. While certainly professions were still barred to them, women were not becoming doctors, they weren't becoming lawyers at this time period. It still meant that for women, especially single women or women who found themselves on their own, they had greater opportunities from the Industrial Revolution than we've somehow found. And so family life is sort of a mixed bag. There are problems, there are issues that families are facing, but there are also opportunities. Again, it's sort of a give and a take. And so lastly, what was working class life? Well, in a word, it was difficult. The massive pressure of urbanization meant that most of the poor had to live in crowded tenements in largely unsanitary conditions. Many were crammed into tenements, tens to a room, leading to overcrowding, leading to any number of health and sanitary issues. Again, this is a real problem when most cities at this time have not evolved beyond or improved upon the Roman system of sanitation disposal, which consisted of taking your waste and pouring it out the window. And so when you have the massive increase in population, this causes a lot of problems and leads to rampant disease. This is an era in which there are outbreaks of disease among the working class and in working class tenements that are devastating to them. Famously, this is a time period of greatly increased cholera outbreaks that are causing any number of problems. And so in all of this, what we should see is though the Industrial Revolution gave some economic opportunity to the working class, it was in many cases a situation in which they felt as though they were powerless, they were living in poor conditions, and what opportunities there were came at great cost. And so what this means is when we talk about socialism and the development of movements to help the working class, this is why they find them so attractive and indeed become highly political in trying to push for their rights and protections.